Jungle whispers, stone shadows, in the lowlands of Central America, where the canopy swallows the sky and howler monkeys cry like distant drums, a world once thrived in hidden grandeur. The year is not easily fixed, for the Maya world stretched across centuries, but we may imagine the 6th century, when its pulse beat strongest. Temples rose above the trees like the backs of ancient stone beasts, their steps eroded yet proud, catching the light of a sun that seemed always to press down heavily on the land. In this realm of limestone and humidity, a civilization flourished, leaving behind whispers carved in stone and shadows still etched across the forest floor. The Maya heartland stretched across today's Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and the Yucatán Peninsula of Mexico. At its height, this civilization supported millions, their lives orbiting cities like Tikal, Copan, and Palenque. Each was a beacon of power filled with plazas, observatories, ball courts, and temples aligned to the stars. For us, standing centuries later in the ruins where trees now pry open stones, it is easy to forget that these were not ruins at all. They were vibrant, bustling cities with artisans chiseling jade, scribes painting codices, and nobles in feathered headdresses performing rituals that bound the community together. One fact remains clear. By around 900 CE, many of these grand cities were abandoned, their palaces empty, their temples silent except for the rustle of vines reclaiming them. But the Maya never disappeared. Their descendants still live across the region, speaking dozens of Mayan languages, carrying forward traditions that root them to their ancestors. The word collapse misleads. The cities fell silent, yes, but the people endured. There are stories, though, passed in hushed tones by modern villagers who live near these ruins. Some say on moonlit nights figures can be glimpsed climbing the stairs of pyramids, carrying torches that leave no smoke. Local guides sometimes smile as they tell visitors that the jungle itself remembers, that the spirits of kings and priests walk in the half-light, watching. Scholars call these myths, but they are part of the living aura that makes the Maya story so compelling. And yet, scholars still debate whether this collapse was truly sudden, like a candle snuffed out, or gradual, like embers fading into ash. Did drought tip the balance? Did endless wars between rival dynasties weaken them beyond repair? Or was it something more internal, society straining under its own ambitions? These questions linger, unresolved, shaping every excavation and every fragile glyph deciphered. For now, in this opening moment, we linger in the shadows of the jungle. Imagine vines strangling temples once painted bright red, monkeys swinging across collapsed roofs, and the silence broken only by the drip of water through broken stone. The Maya story is one of brilliance and fragility, of triumphs carved into limestone and losses left to moss and rain. As the canopy reclaims what was once man's domain, we are invited to follow those whispers and trace those shadows back into the world of the Maya at its height, before collapse, before silence. Cities in the canopy. Deep in the Guatemalan rainforest, Tikal once towered above the green horizon like a jagged crown of stone. Around the year 750 CE, this city thrived as one of the largest Maya capitals, its population perhaps reaching 100,000 souls. Imagine vast plazas filled with merchants trading cacao beans, children playing along the edges of limestone stairways, and processions of nobles adorned in quetzal feathers, shimmering in the sunlight. The tallest pyramids of Tikal stretched more than 200 feet into the air, rising above the trees like watchtowers into eternity. This was not an isolated wonder. Across the Maya lowlands, cities such as Calakmul in modern Mexico rivaled Tikal's glory, locked in cycles of rivalry and alliance. Palenque in Chiapas left us magnificent bas-reliefs celebrating its rulers. Copan in Honduras became a hub of artistic refinement, where sculptors carved monuments that still seemed to breathe with detail. Each city was a jewel scattered across the dense forest, linked by causeways and trade routes, but also divided by dynastic ambition. Archaeologists often remark that Maya cities were not urban in the sense of compact European medieval towns. Instead, they were sprawling networks, with ceremonial cores surrounded by farmlands and hamlets. From above, thanks to modern LiDAR scanning, they look like sprawling constellations, each star a plaza or temple mound, connected by faintly glowing roads. Here, the city and the jungle wove together, life merging with the canopy rather than conquering it. A quirky footnote comes from reports of early explorers in the 19th century. Some claimed to hear flute music at dawn as they camped among the ruins, long before sound recorders could prove or disprove it. They believed spirits of the Maya still played their morning songs. Later visitors suggested it was simply the eerie calls of birds echoey off stone walls, but the legend remains, part of the aura that clings to these silent metropolises. And yet, scholars still debate whether these cities functioned primarily as political capitals, religious theatres, or economic centres. Were they built to impress gods, citizens, or rival kings? Excavations reveal administrative buildings alongside ball courts and royal tombs, but the balance between sacred and secular remains elusive. The grandeur of these cities cannot be denied, but their ultimate purpose, why so much energy was poured into pyramids and plazas, still eludes absolute certainty. We can picture, even now, how it felt to approach one of these cities centuries ago. A weary traveller from a distant village would emerge from the jungle path, and suddenly the earth would open into a plaza wider than any field he had known. Painted stucco glared white and red in the sunlight, drums thundered and incense curled upward toward the heavens. In these moments, the Maya cities were more than architecture. They were cosmologies made tangible, living maps of heaven and earth. But shadows lengthened even in their golden age. The more these cities grew, the more they demanded labour, tribute, sacrifices, and loyalty. For now, though, we leave them standing proud in the canopy, stone giants watching silently as centuries drift by. The long count of time for the Maya, was not a straight line marching forward, but a sacred rhythm, repeating in great cycles. To them, the universe itself was woven from the threads of time, and to understand those threads was to hold power over destiny. In the heart of cities like Copan and Quirigua, stone stelae rose, inscribed with hieroglyphs marking great dates in what we now call the long count calendar. One such monument, Stela C at Quirigua, bears the famous inscription of the Maya creation date, August 11th, 3114 BCE, the moment when their world began anew. Unlike the calendars we know today, the Maya system interlocked cycles like gears. The sacred 260-day ritual calendar, the Tzolkin, spun alongside the 365-day solar year, the Harb. Together, they formed the calendar round, producing combinations that shaped ceremonies, harvests, and coronations. And then, beyond them, the long count stretched across thousands of years, able to record dates as far away as the rise of empires or the fall of stars. Time itself was architecture, built in units of days, months, and bactons, like stairways climbing into infinity. This obsession with time gave Maya rulers immense power. To stand on a temple and announce that the gods demanded a new era, or that an eclipse had been foretold, was to remind the people that kings stood not only as lords of the earth, but interpreters of the heavens. We may compare it to modern leaders who harness science or technology to project authority. The Maya king's laboratory was the sky, his equations the sacred calendar, his audience both human and divine. There is a quirky story told about a carved lintel at Yaxchilan, depicting Lady Zook pulling a cord studded with thorns through her tongue to summon visions. It is said that she did so on a date carefully chosen for its cosmic resonance, one that scholars later realized matched a rare astronomical alignment. Was it coincidence, or proof of the Mayas' precise control of ritual timing? The debate lingers, but the spectacle reminds us how deeply time guided every act, from the mundane to the mystical. And still, scholars debate whether the Maya conceived of time as endless or cyclical destruction. Was the end of a Bacton cause for celebration or terror? In 2012, when the long count reached the close of its 13th Bactoon, doomsayers across the modern world declared the Maya had predicted the apocalypse. The truth was subtler. To the Maya, this was a turning of the page, not the burning of the book. Yet the very fact that such debates continue today shows how deeply their view of time still captivates us. Stand for a moment in the shadow of a Maya stele, glyphs eroded but still legible. Each curl of carving represents a day, a month, a span of years. To the untrained eye, it is a puzzle. To the Maya, it was history itself, cosmic history, binding human lives to the dance of Venus and the turning of the sun. Time was their foundation, their legacy, and perhaps their undoing. For when the rhythms faltered, so too did the cities that once pulsed with order. Kings as gods. In the carved reliefs of Palenque, kings appear not as ordinary rulers, but as embodiments of divinity itself. Pakal the Great, who reigned in the 7th century, is perhaps the most celebrated of them. His tomb, discovered beneath the Temple of the Inscriptions, revealed a massive sarcophagus lid carved with imagery of cosmic rebirth, showing him poised between the roots of the underworld and the branches of the heavens. To his people, he was not merely a statesman, he was the axis around which the cosmos turned. Maya kingship was drenched in performance. A coronation was more than a political event, it was a cosmic renewal. Rulers wore masks of gods, draped themselves in jade beads that shimmered like droplets of water, and staged rituals where bloodletting opened the very fabric of the universe. Kings and queens stood as intermediaries between humanity and the divine, ensuring that maize would grow, that rain would fall, and that the stars remained on course. This theatre of power was reinforced in architecture. Temples were not just houses of worship, they were stages. Imagine a ruler ascending a steep pyramid staircase, drums pounding below, as thousands watched from the plaza. The act itself was symbolic. Each step upward represented a journey toward the heavens, every descent a return to the people. Authority was written into stone, enacted in ritual and remembered in glyphs. A curious, almost playful footnote lies in the eccentricities of some rulers. At Copan, King 18 Rabbit, whose name glyph scholars read as Waxaklajun Ubar Karwil, sponsored some of the most exquisite monuments of the classic era. Yet, local legend insists he was overly fond of ball games, playing so often that he sometimes neglected affairs of state. Whether true or not, it hints at the human quirks behind these towering divine figures. Kings were gods in ritual, but flesh, and blood in daily life. Still, scholars debate whether this divine kingship was universally accepted or often contested. Some stelae show rulers being captured, humiliated, even sacrificed by their enemies. Did their people view them as infallible, or did faith falter when wars were lost and droughts dragged on? Inscriptions are triumphal, rarely admitting failure, yet the archaeological record, burned palaces, toppled monuments, suggests that divine kings were vulnerable, their masks easily shattered when fate turned against them. Picture a Maya king seated on a carved throne, the air heavy with copal incense. A captive kneels before him, bound and trembling, while scribes hurry to record the scene on bark paper codices. The king is both man and myth, judge and priest, a living symbol of the god's will. His people believe that through him the world is ordered, the heavens aligned, and yet, behind the mask, he must have felt the weight of expectation pressing like the jungle heat, knowing that a failed harvest or lost battle could unravel the illusion of divine power. Such was the paradox of Maya kingship, glorious, fragile, and bound inseparably to the fate of the cities they ruled. Blood for the gods. If maize was the body of life for the Maya, then blood was its soul. Across the plazas of Copan and the temples of Yaxchilan, rituals unfolded that bound the human to the divine in ways both awe-inspiring and unsettling. Bloodletting was the most sacred of these acts, not violence inflicted on enemies, but offerings drawn from the bodies of rulers themselves. Kings pierced their ears, tongues, or even their genitals with stingray spines or obsidian blades, letting the blood soak strips of paper that were then burned, sending fragrant smoke skyward. This was sacrifice, not of life, but of essence, the very lifeblood of leadership given back to the gods. The principle was clear. To nourish the cosmos, humanity must return what had been gifted. The maize god had bled to give life, and so kings and queens bled to sustain creation. Lady Zook, wife of King Shield Jaguar of Yaxchilan, is immortalized in a carved lintel depicting her pulling a thorned rope through her tongue. In her trance, she beheld a vision serpent, its open jaws releasing an ancestral warrior into the world of the living. Ritual was theatre, yes, but also revelation. This, however, was not the only form of sacrifice. In times of crisis, human captives were offered on altars or hurled into the sacred waters of cenotes, especially at Chichén Itzá's famous sacred cenote. Archaeologists have recovered bones and offerings from its depths, jade beads, obsidian knives, and even gold that travelled thousands of miles to be cast into its waters. Legends persist that some victims were hurled alive, a chilling reminder of the extremes to which devotion could lead. And here lies a curious note. Some chroniclers in the colonial era claimed that blue paint was daubed onto victims before sacrifice, a ritual hue associated with the rain god Chak. Whether this was a symbolic gift or a preparation for the afterlife remains uncertain. The detail lingers, an eerie echo from centuries past, hinting at layers of meaning lost with the burning of the codices. Scholars still debate whether these sacrifices were primarily acts of devotion, political displays, or strategies of social control. Were captives slain to appease gods, or to send a clear message to rival cities and the common people alike? Some argue that the spectacle of sacrifice reinforced the king's divine role, dramatizing his ability to mediate between realms. Others suggest that, in an era of frequent droughts, these bloody gifts were desperate pleas to the sky. Imagine the scene at dusk, torches flickering against the painted walls of a temple, drums and conch shells beating in rhythm, the air thick with incense and anticipation. A ruler steps forward, obsidian blade in hand, and with calm precision draws blood, eyes fixed upward. To his people, this is not cruelty, it is cosmic duty, a bargain struck so that rains might fall and crops might ripen. To us it may seem alien, but to the Maya it was the very heartbeat of the universe. Networks of jade and cacao. Beyond temples and rituals, the Maya world pulsed with movement, goods, ideas, and people flowing along intricate trade routes that stitched the lowlands to the highlands and beyond. Markets thrived in bustling plazas, where farmers and merchants gathered to exchange the staples of life. Cacao beans, roasted and ground into the bitter chocolate drink beloved by elites, were so prized that they doubled as currency. A handful of beans could purchase a rabbit, while larger quantities secured a slave or fine woven cloth. Jade was the treasure most desired of all. Quarried from the Motagua Valley in Guatemala, its luminous green embodied life, maize, and the eternal cycle of renewal. Kings wore it as ear spools and chest pendants, believing it connected them to the gods. Sculptors shaped it into masks placed over the faces of the dead, ensuring safe passage into the underworld. Even today, when sunlight strikes a piece of polished jade, one can sense why it held such sacred weight. Obsidian flowed into Maya lands from distant volcanoes, its edges sharper than steel. Shells from the Caribbean and Pacific coasts glittered in inland cities, while feathers from the quetzal bird, iridescent green and impossibly long, adorned headdresses that rivaled the majesty of peacocks. Salt, too, was vital. Harvested from coastal flats, it preserved food and seasoned diets, quietly sustaining millions of lives. An odd, almost whimsical detail comes from reports of Maya merchants carrying tiny dog breeds, Tikichi, ancestors of the Chihuahua, along trade routes. Some were eaten, others raised as companions, but a few may have been status symbols, living curiosities that travelled alongside loads of obsidian and cacao. These small creatures remind us that the world of trade was not only about wealth, but also about the quirks of daily life. Yet scholars still debate the true reach of Maya commerce. Did they trade directly with the distant metropolis of Teotihuacan, or did goods pass through countless intermediaries? How far north into Mexico did their routes extend, and how much influence did they absorb in return? The discovery of foreign ceramics in Maya cities and Maya-style murals far from their heartland suggests wide connections, but whether this was sustained trade or rare diplomatic exchange remains contested. Picture a market day in Tikal. The plaza is alive with chatter, the smell of roasting maize, the sound of haggling. Women carry baskets of beans and chilies, while merchants display obsidian blades gleaming under the sun. Nobles arrive to purchase jade beads or feathered cloaks, their attendants carefully counting out cacao beans. Across the plaza, children chase each other, weaving between stalls, while old men tell stories of faraway lands where mountains spit fire and seas stretch endlessly. In these markets, the Maya world became more than a patchwork of cities. It was an interconnected civilization, bound by exchange, sustained by trust and competition alike. And just as trade nourished the cities, it would later become a fragile thread, one that snapped when drought, war and ambition frayed the bonds holding the world together. Water in stone. In the Maya lowlands, water was both a gift and a riddle. Rivers were scarce, and rain, though plentiful in some seasons, could vanish for months under a punishing sun. To survive, the Maya engineered landscapes of ingenuity, carving reservoirs, canals, and cisterns that turned stone into vessels of life. At Tikal, vast reservoirs lined with plaster-stored rainwater, sustaining thousands through the dry months. Some were so large they bordered on artificial lakes, carefully managed by generations of engineers. At Chichén Itzá, the famous cenotes, sinkholes formed in the limestone, offered natural wells. The sacred cenote, in particular, was more than a source of water. It became a portal to the gods, where offerings of gold, jade and human life were hurled into its green depths. Divers in the 20th century recovered artifacts coated with centuries of silt, silent testimonies to a time when water was divine currency. Other cities built intricate systems to catch every drop. At Uxmal, archaeologists uncovered choltons, bottle-shaped cisterns carved into the bedrock, plastered to keep them watertight and covered with stone lids. Families relied on these for drinking water, their survival tied to the careful maintenance of subterranean storage. A single broken seal could mean ruin. It was not simply engineering, it was lifeline. There's a curious tidbit from colonial records describing how locals sometimes believed frogs and toads were guardians of these water sources. When drought struck, Rituals involved coaxing these creatures to sing for rain. Whether this was symbolic or rooted in the natural chorus of amphibians before storms, the practice highlights how myth and hydrology intertwined in daily life. Still, scholars debate whether these water systems were resilient enough to withstand the multi-year droughts evidenced in climate records. Sediment Co. Res from lakes reveal dramatic drops in rainfall around the 9th century, coinciding eerily with the decline of many great cities. Were these reservoirs emptied faster than they could refill, or did political turmoil disrupt their upkeep? The answer remains elusive, hanging like mist above the jungle canopy. Imagine standing at the edge of a Maya reservoir, its plaster walls gleaming faintly in the moonlight, the air filled with the scent of damp earth. For the people of the city, this was no ordinary pond. It was survival itself, a mirror of the heavens, its surface reflecting stars that dictated ritual calendars. Every sip of water carried weight, both sacred and practical. It was the element that bound earth to sky, people to gods, and rulers to the promise of plenty. The Maya carved their survival into stone, and for centuries it worked. But when the rains faltered, even the greatest reservoirs could not shield them forever. The story of water is thus the story of both resilience and fragility, a balance as delicate as the plaster linings that once held the lifeblood of the cities, glyphs carved in silence. The Maya left behind one of the most sophisticated writing systems of the ancient world, hundreds of glyphs, each a blend of sound and meaning, etched into stone, painted on pottery, or brushed onto fragile bark paper codices. Unlike the sprawling ruins of temples, these glyphs whisper personal voices, kings boasting of victories, scribes recording eclipses, priests mapping the steps of ritual. On stelae rising in plazas, their curls and loops appear almost alive, as though the stone itself were still speaking. At Copan, Stela A proclaims the grandeur of King 18 Rabbit, aligning his reign with cosmic cycles. In Palenque, inscriptions in the Temple of the Inscriptions recount dynastic lines stretching back to mythic time. To read them is to glimpse how the Maya blended history and mythology, weaving their rulers into the fabric of creation itself. For centuries, though, this script remained an enigma. Early explorers misread it as purely symbolic, a kind of decorative art. Only in the late 20th century did breakthroughs reveal its phonetic structure, unlocking stories long silenced by moss and rain. And yet, even now, many glyphs remain undeciphered. A single unknown sign can shift our understanding of entire passages. Some scholars joke that the Maya scribes would find it amusing to know we still struggle centuries later, piecing together the stories they intended as clear. Their humour, perhaps, is preserved in quirky glyphs, like those shaped into playful faces or stylized animals, reminders that scribes were not merely bureaucrats, but artists with personality. One fringe claim persists, that the Maya inherited their script from an even older, lost civilization. Enthusiasts point to similarities with the Olmec's enigmatic symbols, or even with faraway scripts like those of Egypt or China. Mainstream scholars dismiss such leaps as overreach. Yet the debate reflects our fascination with the origins of written language, always teetering between science and imagination. Still, scholars debate whether the glyphs we've translated truly represent objective history. Were they accurate records or propaganda carved in stone? After all, most inscriptions commemorate victories, coronations, and divine legitimacy. Rarely do they mention defeat or famine. Are we reading the Maya as they were, or as their rulers wanted to be remembered? This tension shadows every deciphered line, reminding us that history is always written with an agenda. Picture a scribe in a dimly lit chamber, brush in hand, dipping into black and red pigments. He paints onto folded bark paper, his strokes swift but deliberate, capturing cycles of time and records of tribute. Outside, the city bustles. Inside, the scribe inscribes eternity. His work may one day be burned by Spanish priests or buried under fallen temples, but for now, in that moment, it is vibrant, living language. Today, when archaeologists trace their fingers across the grooves of a glyph, they are not only touching history, but rekindling voices long silent. Each deciphered word pulls the Maya a little closer, reminding us that collapse did not erase their stories, it only paused them, waiting for us to listen again. The astronomer priests, high up on the platforms of cities like Uxmal and Copan, priests lifted their gaze not toward neighbouring kingdoms, but toward the heavens. Astronomy for the Maya was not curiosity, it was survival, order, and prophecy. They tracked the movements of the sun, the moon, and most obsessively, the planet Venus. Its cycle of appearances as morning star and evening star was recorded with astonishing precision in the Dresden Codex, one of the few Maya books that survived colonial flames. The priests knew Venus's journey almost to the day, calculating when it would rise, when it would vanish, and when it would blaze again in the twilight. Temples themselves became observatories. At Chichén Itzá, El Caracol, the snail with its spiral staircase, aligned windows to celestial events. From there, priests could mark solstices, equinoxes, and eclipses. At Uxmal, the pyramid of the magician framed the movements of the sun, its corners catching light at significant points in the year. These were not coincidences, they were deliberate stone-bound calendars that transformed architecture into a cosmic compass. A quirky detail comes from colonial accounts describing how Maya villagers in Yucatán would whistle or clap at certain spots near their temples, delighting in how the echoes mimicked bird calls. Centuries later, researchers realized these were acoustic effects designed into the structures, possibly linked to rituals that imitated cosmic voices. Imagine astronomy, acoustics, and ritual blending in ways we are only beginning to rediscover. And yet scholars debate the role of astronomy in political life. Were these observations purely for agriculture, predicting rains and planting seasons, or were they also tools of power? When a king announced an eclipse had been foretold, was it science, faith, or political theatre? Perhaps all three. What we know is that astronomy gave rulers a language of inevitability. If the heavens moved as predicted, then surely their reign was sanctioned by the gods. Picture a Maya priest at dawn, standing atop a temple, a conch shell tucked under his arm. He peers at the horizon where Venus flickers faintly. Around him, the city stirs. Farmers ready their fields, warriors sharpen their blades, mothers stir pots of maize gruel. The priest alone knows that today Venus begins a new phase, a celestial omen. He descends the staircase, carrying with him not only an observation but a verdict, one that will shape ritual, warfare, and the confidence of an entire city. The Maya looked to the stars not as distant lights, but as actors in their cosmic drama. The heavens were alive, speaking a language of cycles and portents. And in decoding that language, the astronomer priests claimed a power that bound earth to sky, ruler to God, and people to destiny, wore drums in the forest. Though the plazas rang with ceremony and markets thrived with trade, the Maya world was also one of rivalry and violence. Cities were not united under a single empire, but divided among competing kingdoms, each led by dynasties hungry for power. Tikal and Calakmul, the two great superpowers of the classic era, became locked in a struggle that historians call the superpower rivalry, stretching for centuries. Their alliances drew in smaller cities like Copan, Caracol, and Dos Pilas, turning much of the lowlands into a chessboard of shifting loyalties. Battles were fought not across open fields, but within the dense rainforest. Imagine warriors slipping through the undergrowth, their bodies painted in black and red, their headdresses bristling with feathers. They carried atlatls, spear throwers, that hurled darts with lethal force, and obsidian blades sharper than razors. The aim was often not mass slaughter, but the capture of enemy nobles, who would later be paraded and sacrificed in rituals that reaffirmed the victor's divine favour. At Bonampak, murals preserved in vivid colour reveal the brutal reality of such wars. Prisoners, stripped and bloodied, kneel before victors in feathered regalia, while musicians beat drums and trumpets to accompany the grim spectacle. The murals shatter any illusion that Maya warfare was ceremonial alone. It was visceral, violent, and profoundly political. There's an unusual detail in some accounts of Maya warfare. Conch shells were blown before battle, their deep moan echoing through the forest. Some scholars suggest this was a tactic to unnerve enemies, others that it symbolically called upon the gods of the sea and underworld. To us, it may sound theatrical, but in the humid stillness of the jungle, such sounds must have felt like the voice of spirits rising from the earth itself. And yet, scholars debate the true scale of these wars. Were they devastating conflicts that razed cities, or controlled rituals designed to showcase dominance? Evidence of burned temples suggests real destruction, but inscriptions often boast of victories without detailing casualties. Some argue that war was as much about spectacle and legitimacy as it was about conquest, a way for rulers to prove their divine mandate through triumph. Picture the jungle in uneasy silence, broken suddenly by the thud of drums and the shriek of whistles. A column of warriors advances along a raised causeway, their obsidian blades glinting as sunlight cuts through the canopy. For the people watching from the plazas, the outcome of such battles was more than politics. It was the fate of their city, their maize fields, their very lives. In war, as in ritual, the Maya sought order in chaos. Yet beneath every triumph lay seeds of tension. For each captive taken, each city burned, tightened the spiral that would one day pull the civilization toward collapse. The stranger from Teotihuacan, long before the Maya reached their peak, another city dominated the highlands of central Mexico, Teotihuacan. At its zenith, around the 4th century CE, it was home to perhaps 100,000 to 150,000 people. Its broad avenue of the dead lined with monumental pyramids of the sun and moon. Though its people left no deciphered script, their influence stretched far, and at some point it reached deep into Maya lands. One of the most dramatic pieces of evidence comes from Tikal. In the year 378 CE, inscriptions record the arrival of a figure known as Siaj Kak, fire is born. He came, the texts say, from the west, bearing the fire of Teotihuacan. On that very day, Tikal's king died suddenly, and soon afterward a new dynasty ascended the throne. Whether Siaj Kak was a conqueror, emissary, or ally remains uncertain, but the imagery that followed at Tikal is striking. Warriors in Teotihuacan garb, obsidian weapons of central Mexican style, and motifs of the feathered serpent carved into Maya stone. A quirky detail lingers in the archaeological record. Excavations in burials at Tikal uncovered the remains of exotic animals, such as golden eagles and jaguars, interred alongside humans. Some suggest these mirrored practices in Teotihuacan, where such creatures were buried within the Great Pyramids. Were they gifts of ideology, imported ritual traditions, or mere coincidence? The answer remains elusive, shimmering like heat haze between cultures. Scholars still debate the nature of this contact. Was it outright conquest, a foreign empire imposing its will on Maya kings? Or was it more subtle, an alliance sealed by marriage and ideology, with Maya rulers adopting foreign styles to project power? Some argue that Tikal became a satellite of Teotihuacan, others that Maya kings selectively borrowed imagery to legitimize themselves. The truth may lie somewhere in between, a blend of politics, trade, and spectacle. Imagine the shock of a Maya villager standing in Tikal's plaza the morning after Siaj-Kak's arrival. Warriors appear wearing unfamiliar headdresses, wielding foreign weapons. New symbols are carved onto stelae, new rituals performed. For commoners, it must have felt as though gods from another world had descended, and in a sense, they had. The distant metropolis of Teotihuacan loomed like a myth made real. The encounter between these two civilizations reminds us that the Maya world was never isolated. It was porous, connected, and vulnerable to currents beyond its own horizon. Foreign fire lit in Tikal's plazas would burn for generations, shaping politics and myth alike. The stranger from Teotihuacan was not just a visitor, he was a turning point, proof that even the mightiest cities were part of larger, shifting worlds. Drought or divine displeasure. The Maya lived in a landscape where survival hinged on the balance between sun and rain. For centuries, the skies had been generous, sustaining maize fields, fruit orchards, and reservoirs. But around the 9th century, something began to change. Sediment cores taken from lakes like Chichancanab in the Yucatán revealed dramatic drops in rainfall, periods where precipitation declined by as much as 40%. These weren't brief dry spells, they were prolonged droughts stretching across decades. For cities that depended on rain-fed reservoirs, the impact was catastrophic. Drought left more than environmental scars. It shook the very foundation of Maya belief. Kings and priests promised that, through ritual, through sacrifice and the turning of the calendar, they could summon rain. When the skies refused to answer, faith in rulers cracked. Imagine standing in a plaza, watching your king draw blood to feed the gods, and yet the fields outside the city still wither. The ritual that once reassured now became a reminder of failure. A peculiar story lingers from Yucatan folklore. During times of drought, frogs and toads, the heralds of rain, were said to vanish into the earth. Some villagers performed rituals to call them back, believing that without their songs, the clouds would not gather. It's a charming image, but also a poignant reflection of how closely people tied natural rhythms to the health of their world. And still, scholars debate the extent to which climate alone caused the decline. Were droughts the spark or merely fuel added to the fire of internal conflict, warfare and overpopulation? Some argue that the Maya had survived droughts before, relying on reservoirs and ingenuity. Others contend that this episode was uniquely severe, a convergence of natural and social pressures that no system, however clever, could endure. Picture the Ents thriving fields of Tikal in such a drought. Maize stalks shriveled, their husks brittle. Reservoirs sank to mud, cracked like broken pottery. Families abandoned villages, seeking water elsewhere, only to find neighbouring cities facing the same crisis. Hunger spread like shadow, and with it, unrest. Nobles quarrelled, dynasties fractured, wars erupted, each city trying to secure what little remained. In the silence of abandoned plazas, we sense both desperation and disbelief. The Maya had built their world on order, calendars, rituals, cycles of the stars, and now nature itself defied them. To us, drought is climate. To them, it was divine displeasure. And when the heavens turned away, so too did the fate of their civilization. The people's burden. Behind every towering pyramid and elaborately carved stela stood the labour of countless ordinary Maya. Farmers bent their backs in the fields, coaxing maize, beans and squash from the soil. Porters carried heavy loads of obsidian, salt or cacao across long causeways, for the Maya had no beasts of burden and no wheeled carts. Every stone and every sack was borne on human shoulders. The grandeur of Tikal and Palenque rested quite literally on the endurance of those who lived in thatched houses just beyond the ceremonial core. The tribute system made this burden even heavier. Farmers were expected to provide not only food for their families, but surpluses for nobles, priests, and kings. In addition came demands for labour, building temples, maintaining reservoirs, hauling limestone blocks for new construction. During festivals and wars, ordinary men might also be conscripted as warriors or as workers, preparing grand rituals. Life for the commoner was a rhythm of toil, punctuated by the occasional wonder of seeing one's labour transformed into monumental beauty. A curious detail surfaces in colonial accounts of Maya villages. Families sometimes raised turkeys, not just for food, but for ritual, painting their feathers and parading them during ceremonies. In some stories, turkeys were said to laugh at night, their strange calls taken as omens of mischief. Whether feared or revered, they remind us that everyday life blended humour and superstition, even under the weight of labour. Still, scholars debate the extent of inequality in Maya society. Were commoners exploited ruthlessly by elites, or did they share in the prosperity of thriving cities through festivals, markets, and social mobility? Some evidence suggests that artisans and scribes enjoyed elevated status, while farmers carried the heaviest load. Yet recent studies of house mounds show surprising variation in wealth, hinting that the line between noble and commoner may not have been as absolute as once thought. Picture a Maya farmer at dawn. He leaves his modest home, a house of poles and thatch, smoke still curling from the hearth. His wife grinds maize on a stone metate, preparing the day's tortillas. Children chase each other among the trees, their laughter mixing with the calls of parrots. Then he shoulders his digging stick and heads for the milpa, where rows of maize stretch into the distance. The work is hard, but it sustains not only his family but the city's temples, palaces, and plazas. Without him, without thousands like him, the gods would have no offerings, the kings no legitimacy, the scribes no stories to inscribe. The people bore the civilization on their backs, literally and figuratively, and when drought struck, when tribute demands rose beyond endurance, it was their burden that became unbearable. The collapse was not only the fall of kings, but the breaking of those who had held them aloft for centuries. Famine in paradise. The Maya lowlands may look lush, but appearances deceive. Beneath the canopy, soils are thin, easily exhausted by overuse. In times of abundance, maize fields stretched wide, feeding multitudes. But when drought gripped the land, the delicate balance between people and earth snapped. Archaeological evidence from sites like Copan reveals traces of malnutrition in skeletal remains, enamel hypoplasia on teeth, stunted growth, and lesions linked to dietary stress. These silent markers tell us that famine crept into a world once thought of as paradise. Famine was more than empty stomachs. It was unravelling faith. Kings promised abundance through bloodletting and ritual, but when children grew thin and granaries emptied, doubt spread like rot. Imagine a family in the 9th century, the mother grinding maize husks mixed with bitter roots, the father foraging for wild tubers, the children hungry and restless. The grand temples still rose above the forest, but at ground level, survival was increasingly desperate. A peculiar note lingers in some Maya texts that survived, mentions of starving maize and thirsty earth. Whether these were poetic metaphors or literal references to famine, we cannot say with certainty. Yet the imagery of food itself withering underlines how cosmic language often masked harsh realities. The divine maize god, once robust and green, had become frail, mirroring the people themselves. And still, scholars debate how widespread famine truly was. Some argue that only the great urban centres suffered, their populations outstripping local resources. Rural villages, less dependent on centralised storage, may have fared better, adapting with hunting and diversified crops. Others believe famine was systemic, spreading across the lowlands as climate stress, warfare and tribute demands cascaded together. The truth may lie between localise, collapses rippling outward, destabilizing networks of trade and trust. Picture a once bustling market at Tikal. The stalls stand half empty. Cacao beans, once plentiful, are rare and precious. People barter instead with scraps of cloth or tools. Women whisper of children lost, while elders recall times when the rains were steady and maize stalks stood tall. The contrast between the grandeur of temples and the scarcity of food must have felt unbearable, as if the gods themselves had abandoned their faithful. And yet famine was not only a story of despair, it was also one of resilience. Some communities shifted toward root crops like manioc, which could withstand harsher conditions. Others sought refuge in the highlands, where soils and rainfall patterns were different. The famine did not erase the Maya, but it did fracture the delicate web that had sustained their greatest cities. Hunger gnawed not only at bodies, but at the very foundations of society, pushing the world closer to collapse. Cities devouring themselves. As the Maya cities expanded, their hunger for resources grew insatiable. Forests were cleared to fuel lime kilns that plastered temples and palaces in gleaming white. Hillsides were stripped to make way for maize fields. The very stones of the earth were quarried to build monuments that proclaimed divine order. From above, it might have looked like progress, a civilization at the height of ambition. But beneath that ambition lurked exhaustion, the slow wearing away of the environment that sustained it. At Copan, in modern Honduras, archaeologists uncovered evidence of severe soil erosion. Hills once green had been stripped bare, their topsoil washed away by rains, leaving only rocky scars. Farmers were forced to plant in ever less fertile ground, their yields shrinking even as tribute demands grew. A population boom compounded the strain, for by the 8th century, Copan may have held 20,000 to 30,000 people within its valley. What had once been abundance now teetered on the edge of crisis. A curious detail emerges from pollen samples taken near ancient fields. They show not only maize, but also traces of weeds and scrub, plants that thrive when farmland is exhausted. This suggests that farmers may have resorted to shorter fallow periods, pushing the land beyond recovery. It's an ancient version of what we might call over-farming, a desperate attempt to meet rising demands despite nature's limits. And still, scholars debate whether environmental degradation alone could topple such powerful cities. Did the land truly collapse under human pressure, or did political turmoil and warfare magnify the stress? Some argue that resource strain made cities brittle, so that when drought or conflict arrived, they shattered instead of bending. Others caution against imagining a single cause, reminding us that collapse is rarely a straight line, but a mangled knot of pressures. Picture Tikal at its zenith, its temples gleaming in the sun, plazas filled with processions. Yet behind the grandeur, hillsides around the city lie barren, forests felled for lime and fuel. Farmers toil longer hours for smaller harvests, while nobles demand ever more tribute for monuments and wars. The city is eating itself, its splendour bought at the cost of the land's slow ruin. The paradox is striking. The very success of the Maya, their ability to build vast cities and sustain large populations, may have sown the seeds of decline. Like fire feeding on dry wood, the hunger of the cities consumed their own foundations. When external shocks came, drought, war, famine, the fragile system cracked, and in the silence that followed, the jungle began its patient work of reclaiming what had been taken. Silent plazas. Walk today through the plazas of once mighty cities like Palenque or Copan, and the silence presses in. Where drums once thundered and incense curled into the sky, there is now only the whisper of wind through ceiba trees and the call of toucans overhead. The stone steps remain, but their surfaces are cracked and softened by moss. Roof combs, once painted in bright reds and blues, are faded to pale limestone. These plazas, once alive with markets, coronations and sacrifices, became stages abandoned to the forest. At Copan, archaeologists noted that after its last great monuments were raised in the early 800s CE, construction slowed and then ceased. The city did not vanish overnight, but its heartbeat faltered. By the late 9th century, the grand plazas stood empty, even as smaller hamlets nearby still clung to life. Tikal, too, raised its final stelae and then fell silent, its great pyramids left to the vines. The collapse was not a dramatic fall, but a long exhalation, a fading of voices. A curious legend lingers in modern lore. Some villagers near Uxmal claim that, on certain nights, the ruins echo faintly with music, flutes, drums, even laughter, as if the spirits of the Maya still hold festivals in the abandoned plazas. Scientists explain such sounds as the play of wind and echo, but the persistence of the tale speaks to the uncanny aura of these places. The silence feels full, not empty. And yet, scholars debate how abrupt this silence really was. Did cities fall into ruin quickly, their populations fleeing en masse? Or did they linger as ghost towns, slowly depopulated over decades? Archaeological layers sometimes suggest both: a final burst of building activity, followed by sudden abandonment, but also signs of squatters occupying once noble palaces. Were these desperate survivors clinging to grandeur, or conquerors claiming the bones of fallen kings? Picture one of these plazas in the last years. The paint is flaking from temple walls, the reservoirs are half mud. A few families still gather for rituals, their voices echoing against the stones, but the crowds are gone. A scribe chisels glyphs onto what may be the final stela, his hands steady, though he knows few will remain to read it. Monkeys clamber on temple stairs, where once nobles in feathered cloaks processed. The city does not end in fire, but in quiet. The plazas remind us that collapse is not always violent. Sometimes it is the slow retreat of people, the fading of ritual, the surrender to time and jungle. The silence that lingers is haunting not because it is empty, but because it remembers survivors in the highlands. Even as the great lowland cities fell silent, the Maya world did not vanish. In the cool highlands of Guatemala and Chiapas, new centers emerged, shaped by resilience and adaptation. Cities such as Cumarcay, also called Utatlan, rose centuries later, built by the Quiché Maya. Here, in steep valleys and mist-shrouded mountains, communities restructured themselves, blending ancient traditions with the necessities of survival. Collapse in one region was renewal in another. The highlands offered advantages the lowlands could not. Rainfall was steadier, soils richer, and cooler temperatures eased the burdens of drought. Here, maize, beans, and squash grew alongside potatoes and other highland crops. The Maya adapted, experimenting with terracing and new techniques to sustain their fields. The once mighty lowland capitals were gone, but their descendants carried forward knowledge, language, and ritual into these new landscapes. A curious, almost endearing note comes from colonial reports of Highland Maya rituals involving kites. Villagers were said to launch brightly decorated kites during festivals, their fluttering paper forms carrying prayers to the heavens. Though scholars debate how ancient this practice truly is, it evokes the image of communities finding joy and continuity even in altered worlds. The Maya, always attuned to the sky, sent their voices upward in fragile but beautiful form. And yet, scholars debate how much continuity linked the highland states to their lowland predecessors. Were they inheritors of the classic Maya legacy, or did they represent a reinvention of Maya identity in response to collapse? Some argue that highland polities consciously referenced lowland traditions in their rituals and political titles. Others believe they were pragmatic societies, drawing only selectively on the past. The truth, as ever, lies in the blurred line between memory and necessity. Picture the bustling heart of Cumarcay in the 15th century. Warriors gather in its ball courts, merchants unload goods in its plazas, and priests conduct rituals before smoky altars. Children dart between stone buildings, their laughter echoing against the hills. The city is alive, vibrant, but its grandeur carries the weight of history, the knowledge that their ancestors once raised even greater cities in the forests below. For them, the collapse was not a story of endings, but of endurance, a reminder that even in loss, the Maya found ways to survive. The highlands prove that collapse was not disappearance. It was transformation, a reshaping of Maya civilization to fit new landscapes, new challenges, and new hopes. While vines smothered temples in the lowlands, life continued in the mountains, proof of the resilience woven into the very fabric of Maya identity. The Itzá's last stand. While many lowland cities crumbled into silence, one site defied the trend: Chichén Itzá. Rising in the northern Yucatán, it flourished into the 10th and 11th centuries, long after Tikal and Copan were abandoned. Its monuments, like the Pyramid of Kukulkan, known as El Castillo, still command awe today. Aligned with the equinox, the pyramid casts the illusion of a serpent slithering down its stairway as sunlight shifts, a dazzling fusion of architecture and cosmology. In this spectacle, the Itzá people proclaimed not decline, but reinvention. Chichén Itzá was no ordinary Maya city. Its art and architecture reveal influences from distant cultures, most famously the warriors and feathered serpents reminiscent of central Mexico. Murals depict columns of soldiers, while the Temple of the Warriors evokes imagery of Toltec Tula far to the north. Scholars puzzle over whether these similarities reflect conquest, migration, or the selective adoption of powerful foreign styles. Chichén Itzá, whatever its origins, became a hybrid city, thriving on diversity. One quirky note lies in the Great Ball Court of Chichén Itzá, the largest in Mesoamerica. Its acoustics are extraordinary. A clap at one end echoes with a rapid series of ricochets, carrying clear across its massive length. Modern visitors often test this phenomenon, unaware that it may once have amplified ritual games or speeches. To the ancient Maya, such echoes must have felt like the voices of gods bouncing back from the stone. Still, scholars debate the nature of Chichén Itzá's dominance. Was it a true empire projecting military power across the Yucatán, or a loose confederation of allied towns united by ritual and trade? Some argue that its authority was short-lived, more fragile than its monuments suggest. By the 13th century, Chichén Itzá too was in decline, its plazas abandoned to silence, though the Itzá people lingered on, migrating westward. Picture the city at its height. Pilgrims arrive from across the peninsula bearing jade, cacao, and feathers. They gather in plazas where processions of warriors stride beneath towering columns. Priests ascend El Castillo, their chants timed to the descent of the serpent shadow at equinox. For a moment, the world feels eternal, as though collapse is impossible. Yet history reminds us that even Chichén Itzá's brilliance was temporary, a defiant flame in the long twilight of the Maya lowlands. The Itzá would endure for centuries, remembered in legend and feared by their neighbours. Their final stronghold at Tayasal in Lake Petén Itzá held out against Spanish conquest until 1697, making them the last independent Maya kingdom. In their resilience, we glimpse the stubborn heart of a civilization that, though battered, refused to vanish. Conquest at the gates. By the 16th century, the Spanish had crossed the sea, their ships like floating mountains on the horizon. Steel, gunpowder, and horses arrived in lands where obsidian and atlatls had long ruled the battlefield. For the Maya, this was not a single conquest, but a drawn-out series of encounters, alliances, betrayals, and brutal wars that unfolded over decades. Cities in the Yucatán fell gradually, some by battle, others by negotiation, all under the shadow of disease and colonial ambition. At first, the Spanish found the Maya world fragmented. Unlike the Aztec Empire in central Mexico, no single ruler commanded the lowlands. Instead, dozens of city-states and highland polities pursued their own interests, sometimes allying with the invaders to settle old rivalries. This disunity slowed conquest, but also made resistance less coordinated. By the 1540s, much of the Yucatán was under Spanish control, though fighting continued sporadically for generations. A curious and often overlooked detail is how the Spanish were sometimes mistaken for returning gods. In certain Maya traditions, the feathered serpent deity Kukulkan was expected to return from the east. Some chroniclers claimed that the sight of Spanish ships arriving over the horizon fulfilled that prophecy for local communities. Whether this belief was widespread or a colonial embellishment remains debated, but it highlights how myth and conquest became entangled in the Maya imagination. Still, scholars debate the degree to which conquest was truly inevitable. Was Spanish victory the result of superior weaponry, or was it disease, smallpox, measles, influenza, that did the deeper work, emptying villages before battles were fought? Some argue that without epidemics weakening indigenous societies, resistance might have lasted much longer, perhaps altering the balance entirely. Others contend had political fragmentation more than disease sealed the Maya's fate. The debate continues, shaped by archaeology, epidemiology, and oral history alike. Picture a Maya village as the Spaniards arrive. Warriors emerge from the forest, spears in hand, only to face men in armour, astride animals they had never seen before. Muskets roar, and the air fills with acrid smoke. Behind the soldiers march priests, bearing crosses and demanding conversion. For the villagers, it must have felt like the arrival of an alien world, as incomprehensible as a new constellation suddenly blazing in the sky. The conquest was not the end of the Maya, but it was a profound rupture. Temples crumbled, codices burned, and ancient rituals were driven underground. Yet even in the shadow of conquest, the Maya endured, adapting their traditions, speaking their languages, and finding ways to weave old beliefs into new realities. The gates of their cities may have fallen, but the heart of their civilization still beat quietly, awaiting its chance to be remembered. The codices burned. Of all the losses that followed conquest, perhaps none was more devastating than the destruction of the Maya codices. These books, painted on folded bark paper, contained centuries of knowledge, astronomical tables, ritual guides, histories of kings and dynasties. They were portable libraries, fragile but powerful, carrying the voices of scribes who had recorded the rhythm of time itself. When Spanish friars arrived, they saw them not as treasures, but as tools of paganism. In 1562, in the Yucatán town of Mani, Bishop Diego de Landa ordered a mass burning of Maya manuscripts. He wrote afterward, almost casually, "We burned them all," which they regretted to an amazing degree. Today, only 4 codices survive: the Dresden, Madrid, Paris, and Grolier. They are fragments of a once vast archive, silent testimony to what was lost. Imagine hundreds of books, painted in vivid red and black, curling in the flames, their wisdom vanishing into smoke. A quirky, almost haunting detail emerges from later Maya accounts. Some elders claimed that the knowledge of the burned codices was not entirely gone, that it lived on in memory, whispered through oral tradition, encoded in rituals and prayers. They said the gods themselves had absorbed the books into the sky, turning them into stars. Whether myth or hope, it reflects a resilience. Even when pages burned, the knowledge was not wholly extinguished. Still, scholars debate what exactly was lost. Were the codices primarily ritual handbooks, or did they contain histories, literature, even works of philosophy? Some argue that the surviving examples suggest a practical focus: astronomy, calendars, divination. Others believe entire genres of Maya thought may have disappeared, leaving us with only a shadow of their intellectual world. The debate is sharpened by the tantalizing glimpses in murals and glyphs that hint at stokas. Rise we can no longer read. Picture the scene in Mani, friars chanting prayers, flames licking at folded bark paper, the painted faces of gods and kings blackening and curling. Villagers watch, some in horror, others perhaps in silence, knowing that generations of memory are turning to ash. It is a moment of cultural amnesia enforced by fire, one that still reverberates centuries later. And yet the survival of even 4 codices is a miracle. The Dresden Codex, with its Venus tables and eclipse predictions, still astonishes astronomers with its accuracy. It is a reminder that the Maya mind was as vast as their cities, capable of grasping cosmic cycles that stretched across centuries. For every page we lost, we can only wonder what brilliance once existed and grieve for the silence that remains. Maya voices today. Though the plazas lie in silence and the codices mostly burned, the Maya people themselves never vanished. Today, more than 6 million Maya live across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador, speaking over 30 distinct languages that descend from the tongues once carved into stone. In the highlands of Guatemala, one hears Quiché, Cachiquel, and Mam. In Yucatán, Yucatec Maya flows through daily life, alive in markets, homes, and schools. Each word spoken carries echoes of ancestors who refuse to let their culture die. Traditional practices remain woven into daily rhythms. In many communities, maize is still the heart of diet and ritual, honoured as sacred sustenance. The milpa system, rotating maize, beans and squash, is as old as the classic Maya cities, yet still practiced by farmers today. Festivals celebrate ancient gods alongside Christian saints, a syncretic blending born of survival under colonial rule. A Maya healer may burn copal incense and whisper prayers in an ancient tongue, while nearby a church bell tolls. One curious tradition survives in the Day of the Dead celebrations. In some towns, families craft giant kites, painted with vibrant patterns, and launch them into the sky. The fluttering paper wings are said to carry messages to ancestors, bridging the realms of the living and the dead. It is a striking image, fragile, colourful sheets rising toward the heavens, as if the codices burned centuries ago have been reborn in the sky. Still, scholars debate the extent to which modern Maya traditions directly reflect their ancient past. Are today's rituals preserved continuities from the classic period, or creative reinventions shaped by centuries of colonial influence? Some argue for deep, unbroken threads, cosmology encoded in every offering of maize and every chant to the gods. Others caution that much has changed, and what survives is as much adaptation as inheritance. Both views recognize, however, the profound resilience of Maya identity. Picture a modern Maya village at dawn. Smoke rises from hearths as women grind maize on stone metates, just as their ancestors did. Children chatter in Yucatec or Quiché as they head to school, where they learn both Spanish and their mother tongue. In the plaza, a market begins to stir, stalls bright with textiles woven in patterns that carry centuries of symbolism. The rhythm of life is at once ancient and modern, a bridge across time. The Maya collapse was not an ending, but a transformation. The people remain, their voices carrying across mountains and forests, their traditions adapting yet enduring. In every spoken word, every woven cloth, every offering of maize, the civilization breathes still, science beneath the canopy. For centuries, explorers hacked through vines and roots, machetes in hand, uncovering ruined pyramids stone by stone. But today, new eyes pierce the jungle without lifting a blade. Using LiDAR, light detection and ranging, archaeologists have revealed a hidden world beneath the canopy, entire cities sprawling far larger than anyone had imagined. Planes sweep over the Yucatán and Guatemala, firing pulses of laser light that map the contours of the land. What looked like untouched forest is suddenly revealed as a landscape teeming with ancient roads, terraces, and forgotten plazas. In 2018, a LiDAR survey over northern Guatemala stunned researchers. It revealed over 60,000 previously unknown structures, including fortifications, causeways, and fields. The discovery suggested that the lowland Maya population may have been far higher than once believed, perhaps 10 million or more at its peak. Cities like Tikal, once thought isolated, were part of a dense network of interlinked settlements, their reach stretching across valleys and hills in a web of stone and soil. One quirky revelation comes from LiDAR images that show not only grand plazas, but also small household compounds, hidden beneath centuries of growth. In some cases, what appeared to be simple hills in the forest turned out to be pyramids, their symmetry betrayed only by the laser's precision. To walk there today is to see only trees and vines, but on a computer screen, the outlines of a vanished civilization glow like embers rekindled. Still, scholars debate how to interpret this new flood of data. Does the sheer scale of revealed sites prove a centralized, interconnected empire, or does it confirm a patchwork of fiercely independent kingdoms? Was the Maya lowlands one vast urbanized zone, or simply a constellation of cities loosely tied by trade and ritual? LiDAR provides detail, but not always answers. The debates it sparks are as vibrant as the discoveries themselves. Picture the scene. An archaeologist sits before a monitor, scrolling across a digital landscape. The canopy is stripped away, revealing roads crisscrossing like veins, terraces stacked along hillsides, and forgotten temples rising in ghostly outlines. Outside, the jungle hums with cicadas and parrots, but on the screen, another world unfolds. A world built by millions of hands, lost for 1,000 years, now visible again. The science beneath the canopy does more than confirm the Maya's greatness. It shows us their resilience, their ingenuity, their ability to shape landscapes on a colossal scale. It reminds us that the ruins we see are only fragments, the barest surface of a civilization whose full grandeur is still being uncovered. Fringe tales of aliens. Whenever ruins rise from the jungle, shrouded in mystery and grandeur, speculation follows. The Maya, with their astronomical knowledge, towering pyramids, and sudden collapse, have often been swept into the tide of pseudo-archaeology. Some fringe theorists claim that the Maya were visited, or even taught, by extraterrestrials, pointing to the precision of their calendar and their monumental architecture. In these stories, El Castillo at Chichén Itzá becomes not a temple, but a cosmic beacon, and the Dresden Codex transforms into a star chart left by beings from the sky. Such ideas gained traction in the 20th century, fueled by popular books and television series that blurred the line between fact and fantasy. A curious anecdote tells of a mural in Palenque's Temple of the Inscriptions, where the sarcophagus lid of Pakal the Great depicts the king reclining amidst celestial imagery. Fringe theorists argue it shows him piloting a spacecraft. Scholars, of course, explain it as a symbolic journey of rebirth, Pakal descending into the underworld and ascending to the heavens like the maze god. But the space traveller interpretation persists, capturing the modern imagination, and still, scholars debate, not the presence of aliens, but why such theories captivate us. Is it the allure of mystery, the tendency to undervalue indigenous genius, or the human habit of projecting the unknown onto the unfamiliar? Some argue that these stories reveal more about modern anxieties and fascinations than about the Maya themselves. By attributing Maya achievements to outsiders, we risk erasing the ingenuity of the people who truly built this civilization. Yet these fringe tales hold a peculiar charm. They remind us that the Maya world still feels uncanny, as though it resists being neatly contained by history. To walk beneath the towering temples of Tikal or Gar, at the serpent shadow of Chichén Itzá, is to feel something both earthly and otherworldly. For some, that sensation is enough to spark theories of visitors from the stars. Picture standing at Palenque, staring at Pakal's sarcophagus lid, the intricate carvings of roots, serpents, and celestial symbols intertwining. To an archaeologist, it is myth-made stone. To a dreamer, it is a man flying through the cosmos. Both gazes linger in awe, though one seeks explanation in earth and the other in sky. In truth, the Maya need no extraterrestrial help to astonish us. Their calendars tracked cycles of time with breathtaking precision, their cities reshaped landscapes on continental scales, and their myths tied humanity to the cosmos with poetry and depth. That their achievements still invite both scholarship and speculation is perhaps the greatest testament to their enduring power. Lessons in collapse. When we study the Maya, we are not merely looking backward, we are gazing into a mirror. Their story of rise and decline resonates because it is, at its core, a human story of ambition, ingenuity, and fragility. The Maya built cities that rivaled any in the ancient world, yet those same cities strained their environment, demanded ceaseless labour, and relied on a delicate balance of rain and soil. When that balance faltered, so did the civilization. Modern researchers often draw comparisons between the Maya and ourselves. We, too, live in sprawling urban networks dependent on fragile systems of food, water, and climate stability. Just as Maya rulers assured their people that rituals could summon rain, today we place faith in technology, markets, and policies to solve crises. The question lingers, are we any more secure than they were? A curious anecdote comes from the drought studies of Lake Chichancanab. Scientists drilling its sediments found layers that suggested decades-long droughts, punctuated by sudden, heavy rains. This boom and bust rhythm reminds us of the unpredictability of nature. In a sense, the Maya collapse was not simply about too little rain, but about volatility, the very kind of instability we now witness in shifting climate patterns across the globe. Still, scholars debate how far we should stretch the parallel. Is it fair to compare a pre-industrial society of millions to a global network of billions? Some argue that the analogy risks oversimplifying both histories. Others insist the lesson is clear: complex societies are fragile, and resilience must be cultivated, not assumed. The debate itself reflects the enduring relevance of the Maya story. Picture, for a moment, a Maya farmer watching his fields shrivel, his reservoirs sink to mud. Then picture a modern farmer facing drought, wildfires, or floods. Though separated by a millennium, the shared vulnerability is unmistakable. Both face forces larger than themselves, forces that test not only survival but the structures of their societies. The Maya remind us that collapse is not sudden apocalypse, but a process, a slow unravelling of systems under cumulative strain. It is also not the end. The people endured, adapting in new lands, carrying their culture forward. Perhaps that, above all, is the lesson. That survival lies not in clinging to grandeur, but in the capacity to change, to find continuity amid loss. The Maya collapse is history, but it is also warning, parable, and hope. It shows us both the limits of ambition and the resilience of human spirit. In their story, we see shadows of our own. The jungle keeps secrets. Today, when one wanders through the lowlands of Guatemala or the limestone plains of Yucatán, the past does not lie dormant. It breathes through every vine, every toppled wall, every glyph half swallowed by moss. The jungle, dense and relentless, has become both grave and guardian. it hides the scars of collapse while preserving the bones of cities that once pulsed with life. To walk through Tikal or Calakmul is to feel that the forest itself is alive with memory, whispering of kings and captives, farmers and scribes, rituals and wars. Archaeologists, armed now with lidar and drones, cut through this leafy veil, but the jungle still holds mysteries close. Countless sites remain unmapped, their plazas unseen beneath the canopy. Some communities in remote valleys still tell stories of lost cities, hidden under roots and soil, waiting to be revealed. A quirky legend from Belize speaks of ghostly stone staircases appearing after heavy rains, only to vanish again under creeping vines, a reminder that the forest gives and takes in its own time. And still, scholars debate how many secrets remain. Are there vast undiscovered capitals rivaling Tikal lying hidden in the Peten? Or are most of the great cities already known, with what remains being smaller villages and shrines? The jungle resists certainty, swallowing monuments as if to remind us that human ambition, however vast, is always temporary. Picture the scene. Sunlight breaks through a gap in the canopy, illuminating a mossy pyramid. A toucan flits across the sky, its wings flashing bright colours. Beneath your feet, roots pry open stones laid by hands 1,000 years gone. The air is heavy with the scent of earth and flowers, the calls of monkeys echoing like distant laughter. For a moment, the present dissolves, and it feels as though the Maya world still lingers, not vanished but merely waiting. The collapse did not erase them. Their descendants live on, their languages spoken, their rituals renewed, their knowledge rediscovered. The jungle keeps their secrets, yes, but it also keeps them alive, woven into the land itself. And as we uncover more, we are reminded that civilizations do not truly disappear. They transform, endure, and whisper through the ages, waiting for us to listen. Conclusion. The story of the Maya collapse is not one of disappearance, but of transformation. Their cities rose in brilliance, faltered under the weight of drought, war, and ambition, and then yielded to the jungle. Yet their people endured, adapting in highlands, reshaping traditions, and carrying languages and rituals across centuries. Archaeology, climate science, and oral history continue to peel back layers of silence, reminding us that the past is not fixed, but ever unfolding. The Maya warn us of fragility, the cost of pushing systems beyond balance, while also offering hope in their resilience. Their collapse is not a final chapter, but a continuing dialogue between ruins and living communities, between silence and survival. In the whispers of the jungle and the voices of millions today, we see that the Maya never truly left us. Their story is not ended, it is still being told,